Hey, Composite Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we're going to be going over Iris 2 as a rundown. So if you are like me and already know quite a few synthesizers, know quite a bit about synthesis, know your effects, know mixing, know all this stuff, then this video is for you. I'm just going to be showing you the general concept of Iris 2, some cool functionality, and running over where all the menus and buttons and things are, because that can be kind of annoying. So cutting off a lot of the annoying filler crap that you tend to see in tutorials, and then that are explaining things. And then if you're going through this as a series, this is the second video in the series, so this may be a little confusing for you and a bit overwhelming, but it is a good overview. And don't worry, we'll be covering all this stuff in more detail later. Also should let you know what you should and shouldn't know, like things I kind of expect you to already have a handle on. So the first and most important and coolest feature inside of Iris 2 is the spectral filtering. So Iris 2 is it's a sample-based filter VST synthesizer. So you can load samples in here and do what's called spectral filtering to them. It's sort of like really crazy layering and is the attractive feature to this synth. So up here in this corner, we're going to start here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. These are your samples, and you can solo and mute each sample. Each sample acts as a layer and has its own controls, except for the master section, which they share. Okay, cool. So that's what we have here. And we see here that we have level controls for each one. And if we click on one, we can go between them. And on each one, we have the ability to load samples, and you see oscillator waves as a separate tab. They're just sampled oscillators, so it's sample based. And if we load up one, so let's go to our samples. I'm going to go to instruments, accordion. I'm just going to load up my first accordion sample. And so a couple things just happened. It loaded up a sample. It gave us a waveform view and a spectrum view. We're able to zoom our view by grabbing and zooming in and out right here. Kind of handy. And they follow general hotkey, whatever you call them, consistencies. I know there's a word for it. I just forgot it. Double click and it resets values. Hold control and you get fine control, stuff like that. You'll notice that also when we dropped in our sample, besides generating a spectrum, it also mapped it to the keyboard for us. So that it thinks that the root node of this thing here is C2. If that's wrong, you can make the adjustment by simply clicking and grabbing and moving this node around. You may also come up here alternatively, and we see here that we have this sample tab that we can move in and out. We also have a master tab. So there's a lot of menus that appear here. I try to keep mine as small as possible, but we can also move the root note tab here. So first, let's go over this because this is the coolest thing. And I'm going to go over it really fast. If you want a more in-depth view on it, you can go watch the video that will appear later on in this series. So here we have our spectrum view. Up and down is the spectrum of the sample we just loaded. Left and right is time. You can turn on a time display in seconds or in samples, meaning a measurement down here in the settings if you desire. You can also make it load to C4 whenever you load a new sample if you desire as well. So in here, you're able to switch between two views. You can go between the spectrum view and the waveform view. Very, very handy for when you want to do things like drum loops, which I actually do because it's an amazing filter, like an incredibly cool filter. So let's go ahead and do that. So up here, we have our zoom functions. We're able to zoom in and out. I'll let you explore that. Here we have the ability to select parts of the spectrum or in time in very specific ways. So this first one's time selection. It's horizontal. That's how you know. And we can select a segment of time and say, hey, only play this segment of time. So you see this is blue and the rest is gray. You'll also notice that it will start where our selection has begun. And not the first time, but you see it the second time, third time. So it is now starting where our selection is. We can adjust the length of our selection, and we can even draw in completely new segments. But it doesn't skip to them. That's an important note. It maintains the distance. Now, if you play high notes, it will go faster. So you'll have to change your resample, well, not your resampling, your pitch shifting algorithm here. So we'll go over that in just a second. So we just made a selection. Say you want to undo your selection. Well, to do that, you simply go to this X and it will undo your selection. Next up, we have, well, let's skip to this one. This is the frequency selector. So now we're able to select via frequency. So we say, hey, play these frequencies. This is like, okay, this is just like general filters and just playing different parts of it. So that's not that interesting. Where's the cool part? Well, you're able to do things. So we'll get rid of our selection like a box. Now things are getting kind of weird. So you're able to select time and frequency. But it doesn't stop there, right? You'd be like, oh, bandpass filter, easy peasy. Well, let's do this and this here and that there and put one over here and one over there. Now we just got like, whoa, dude, like this is getting crazy. So this is getting powerful at this point. There are definitely some innovations I was thinking of that could just be done, but this is pretty cool. So you could sit here and play forever just filtering things in super mega specific ways. It gets even awesomer. Awesomer, if that's a word. You can do a free lasso and select a range like so. Like, woohoo, look at that. It's Batman. And then, or you could do a paint tool. So you could sit here and paint in a specific part of the spectrum. And now if we were to play this. So things are getting like, this is just, man, this is cool. This is the reason why you would use this thing. Okay, so once you have that, next up, we have a really cool function right here. So let's go ahead and talk about what this thing does. So here we've got our magic wand tool. And our magic wand tool allows us to select a specific frequency. Or we could go over here and select different frequencies. So basically, it will intelligently look at a specific section. I believe it uses the image to do this, and then it will translate that over to audio. And I think they use resynthesis to do this. It's just a bunch of stuff that I could think about all day long. And so it does that. Now that's pretty cool. So it's like, oh, look, it like isolated some tones. Great. But it gets more useful because this is great, but it's not like terribly useful. But if you click on it again, it will now look for a harmonic series related to that piece that you had selected. And you can do the same here. And if you double click, it will take or not double click, but if you continue to click, it will look again. And eventually it will just stop responding. It'll say like, hey, I've looked and looked and looked, and these are the frequencies I think that should go there. So you see here, we can use samples in a way, whereas instead of them being, like the sound, and instead of using synthesis as, I don't know, I hear comparisons with other VSTs and stuff, but this is like, the idea is you can take this and literally sculpt something. It's like not your starting point or your ending point. And it doesn't stop here either. What you can do is you can erase specific spots. It's just like the paint tool. So if we play this, it's pretty cool. So we can like basically do phasery things. And I'm going to undo that. So your undo and redo buttons are up here because your host VST, your host DAW may have a separate undo function. So they've included them up here so that you can undo your moves that you desire. Okay, so we have our eraser tool, and then we're able to flip things in their domains. So this first one is we can flip the time domain. So if we click this, it will flip the time domain. As you see, everything that was selected has not been, but horizontally. So it's been flipped in the time domain. And none of that other stuff was selected. So now it's all been selected. Cool. We also have the ability, I'm gonna go ahead and flip my time domain back by clicking on it. And okay. And now I'm going to flip my selection. And so here it'll flip the selection. So everything that wasn't selected is now selected. And everything that was selected is now not selected. I'm going to flip it back. And I'm also able to flip the frequency domain. So here's the frequencies that were selected are now not selected. I oftentimes will grab two crazy bass sounds, filter them in really unusual ways, and follow them up with all sorts of cool distortion and stuff. But then one will be inverted, will be the same exact setup, only the filtering will be inverted. And then that one might play at a different spot in the track. And it's really, really cool because it's like related. So it's got like a feel of the same sound design, but it's a completely different sound. So it's very kind of interesting how you can do this. You can also take things that are super atonal, isolate frequencies, find a spectrum, and then use it as the starting point for maybe some really complicated FX stacks. The effects in here are all right. Like they're cool, but I like their filters, but I definitely would go towards external distortion effects, things of that nature, because there's just more flexibility, and this thing eats CPU like none other. So just having it open boosts my CPU. So generally, once you've done your sound design in here, if you figured out what you wanted to automate, I try not to close it, because check it out. If you close it, it takes friggin' forever for it to open back up. And if it ever becomes unresponsive to your moves, you have to close it and open it, and it should respond again. I've noticed that is a problem. I wish there was some CPU optimization options like, hey, turn off real-time modulation viewing and stuff like that. So anyways, that is that. Now, of course, if we had things that are time sensitive, it's useful to do this filtering in the waveform view instead of the frequency view, because we're able to make changes specifically to where they are on the waveform. So if we have like a drum loop and we want our kick to be filtered away differently, we can do things like that. I'm going to skip the example for now just because I need to go a little bit faster here. So we have here our loop start, our loop end, our crossfade, offset, and delay. These all affect the way the sample is interpreted. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect this. I want to deselect my thing. It has become unresponsive. This is what I was warning you about. See, occasionally you get problems like this, but very powerful. So, okay, cool. Now you're able to change your loop start. So it'll play from the start, which is, you see this yellow line at the beginning. If you can't, you should be able to see it on yours. That's the offset. That's where it starts. And it'll go to the end, or the loop end. So we'll bring that up. So it'll reach this end, and then it will loop back to our loop begin. So we'll start here, go whoop, and go through a loop. And you see here we get a click. And so you probably don't want to click. So we can increase the crossfade. You see it'll fade out and fade in, so we get a smooth loop. You can hear this one. So you would mess with this value to get one that's a little more transparent. That one was kind of super audible. Also, get rid of that. Yeah, these things just stay open, and clicking on them doesn't do anything. You have to select another tool. And so that's crossfade. And then you can change the offset, so it'll start at wherever the offset is. Cool. So that is pretty much the spectrum view. So let's just really quick come up here. In your settings, you have a couple options that you should probably be aware of. You have this radius RT. I'm about to show you this. This is you can change the quality settings here and the range of octaves and stuff like that. You also have voicing can become a problem with radius RT. You also have the ability to change where your notes go automatically, where it thinks to map your root notes in here. And you have your libraries and stuff, so you can change where that sort of thing, those sorts of things are. Now, you have a glide, which is glissando, so how long it takes to glide if you were to hold down notes. So you can change that there. Intensity is basically a combination of saturation and compression. And then you have your output, and then you can boost the output here. You'll notice that the output tends to be really soft by default. You can also type in values, so that's kind of a handy deal. Now, let's move over to the sample controls. On the sample controls, you have here the sample that you're using, and you can browse for a new sample in a more traditional style if you want. So in the playback setting, you have a couple options here. You have forwards, forwards, backwards, backwards, and backwards, forwards. These backwards, forwards, forwards, backwards must have the loop setting on. So we have forwards, which will just play forwards. And if our loop is on, it'll go through our loop region. We can turn it off if we want. Cool. But next up, we have backwards, forwards. Now the loop region must be on for this to work. So you see it will actually activate it for us. It says it's not on over there, but clearly it's still on. So it's going forwards, backwards, and then you can go backwards. You see it starts at the end of the sample, and the same thing for backwards, forwards. So we'll start at the end, and then we'll go through our loop, even though it says our loop's not on. So we can turn our loop on if we want. We have retrigger. So if we go to our forwards, when we hit a new note, if retrigger is on, it'll retrigger at whatever our playback setting is at. But if we have retrigger off, it'll pick up where it left off. The new note will. So you hit a note. If you hit a note and then go over a note and hit a new note, it will start at the beginning, as you can see. But if I hit a note and then hit a new note when it's playing through, it will actually start wherever my current note's at. So if I hit a note and hit a note, it restarts. But if I hit a note and then watch. So you see it just starts wherever that note currently was. So that's how that works. Now you may notice that they're not moving in uniform fashion. That's because of the way we're pitching up and down. If we play higher notes, it'll pitch faster. If we play lower notes, it'll pitch slower. It'll play slower. The other one will play faster. And that's because of the resample setting. You're able to do fixed so that no matter what key you play, it'll be the same thing. which could be useful if perhaps you're doing some sort of a sample filtered deal. And then we have our radius RT, and you'll have a thing pop up and you see our voices just turned red, meaning we have issues with our voices setting, and that's what was in the settings tab that I showed you. This is their fashion of doing pitching where time is consistent. So if I were to make like a move with several boxes to inform some sort of a rhythm, and then change notes here. So let's play a different note. You see that now it plays the same, and it's very, very high quality. Pretty cool. Sometimes and also when you hit two notes, they'll now go by at the same speed, even though the little white lines are kind of crazy. So you can hear audibly, they go by at the same speed. So pretty nifty. Now, if we come down here, so yeah, that's that. Now, if we come down here, we have tuning. We're able to change the tuning by coarse amount or fine amount. We have panning and gain. And we also have send effects. Now, you notice right now we can't turn our send effects on. We have these little power buttons. Let me going, why can't we turn our send effects on? Well, we have to open up our master section. So in our master section, we have our master filter. So this filters the whole sound, and they have a whole bunch of filter algorithms. I'll let you go through there and mess with this. This is just general filter stuff. You can turn it on and off. Having it on does processing, so be careful. Mastering. We have master effects. So we have master effects, which are effects on the whole thing. So all our samples coming together, and we do it here. Or we can use send effects. So we're able to say, hey, I want one to receive its own distortion. And we can actually use it as a send effect versus 2 and 3 and 4 can have their own deal as well. So that's kind of cool. Now, they are send effects, so you pick one and then you live with that one. So let's say now on each effect, you can choose your effect. So we have distortion, chorus, delay, reverb. I'm assuming you know what that stuff is. Then we click this little triangle and we're able to change the parameters of them. So we say, hey, I want a clipping distortion. And then now if you want to say, hey, I want this amount of distortion here. And let's say that you load up a second sample and you do its own filtering. Now you want to do different effects. Well, guess what? You got clipping. And if you change it here, so let's say asymmetrical, you just changed it there. So they are send effects. So they are the same across the board. So just be careful. Having them on does take processing. And even just the interface being on takes processing because of the way they do modulation. We'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, just be aware of that. It's very, very straightforward after this. This is the most complicated part, I think. It's also the coolest part. Now let's go ahead and jump down here. This is really the last section. After this, there's not really too much. So we have here the ability to modulate with modulation sources, and just by selecting them, we can change them. So you see we have an LFO, and we're able to change the types, and we have all these LFO options. I'll let you explore those. And we also have, oh, this is important. We're able to hide the keyboard and modulation tab, which I often have closed. I just happen to have it open this time because I like to have more exact control, and I'll zoom up so I can get at my spectrograph a little bit easier, which is another benefit to closing things. So you see, oh, look at all that extra room. So the modulation, if I open up my sample window here, we see here that we have all these little circles with 2 dots in them. This is a place that I could put a modulation thing. So let's actually go to the master. And so on the master, I'm going to turn on the filter. And so right now, that's what our filter does. Well, I can grab one, if you're familiar with Massive. See, it says L1, meaning LFO1, and I can put it as a modulation source and tell it to modulate it a particular way. So you see, it's listening to the LFO. Did I tell it to loop? I want it to loop. So you see, now I have a cool, more organic movement as I go. And right now, I'm telling it to either do positive or negative. So I can like basically say, okay, and this, when it's this way, when this is down, this is correspondingly down. Or I could say when that is down, this is correspondingly up. I may have that backwards right now, but I'm not thinking too hard. It's pretty easy to configure these things when you put them on there because you're getting a motion that you want. So if you want to be specific though, you can do that. But it can get more complicated. You see we have 2 more, and so you can actually have different modulation sources on here triggering each other differently, having different amounts of dominion. As you can see, oh, look, the envelope would affect the cutoff down to here, but the LFO would only ever be able to affect it here. And so these values would sum together and give you your final cutoff knob position that would change where you are. So lots of opportunities for self-modulation. So as here we have our typical, we're able to use an attack setting for this thing as it fades in. We're able to morph between things. We're able to modulate our LFOs with other LFOs. We're able to change the sign of our LFOs. We're able to, well, okay, so you see here sets the LFO to restart with each new voice, and we're able to sync it with the host if we want, like a wobble of some kind that lines up with what we're doing. Also, you're able to do this with envelopes. You can actually invert the envelopes, which I think is wicked cool. And of course, it's basically like you just flip this, sort of, but it's just in a convenient spot right here. Maybe you have a ratio of some kind here you're trying to preserve, something weird, I don't know. And up here, you see we can also grab our macro controls and our controller controls. This is basically the same thing as massive. And so you're able to say, oh, key tracking for this thing, velocity control for this thing, aftertouch for this thing, which are all things that are sensitive to the controller that you're playing. Or maybe if you're using your key tracking could be important regardless if you're just writing notes in a piano roll. Same with velocity. Things like aftertouch and mod wheel. Mod wheel, if you're going to modulate the mod wheel, then cool, but I'd more likely just modulate a parameter. Next up, we have our macro controls. So you're able to set these about and have them do a bunch of things at the same time. So say, oh, one here and then one over here. And look, now M2. Oh, I've been grabbing two. M2 is doing two jobs. So when I move this knob, it's going to move both of these, not just one of these. So anyways, you can hide and open the macro thing here. And then you could set up one knob to control a lot of things. So here I'm controlling the resonance and the cutoff. And I'm able to do this and automate just this one knob. It would be maybe more intuitive to use in a live setting or just automate my track just as a creative decision. So, okay, cool. So that's the controller setting. We're able to undock this, by the way, which you can do as a VST, which I think is wicked cool. You're able to undock a couple things. Now over here, so that's the modulation tab. So we can go over here to our mix tab as well. And so instead of seeing everything in those side columns, we can have a separate window. We're able to see each sample, its layers, and all the settings. So the send effects and the master effects. Well, not the master effects, the send effects and the panning course. I don't know why I said master effects. Not even close to master effects. And then over here, we have our master section with our master filter. So if you want this as a separate window, just so you can see things, I tend to work with things in here because I want to keep as few windows up as possible. So let's say that we've loaded up another sound and now we have some things going. We make some selections and filter it weird. And we have that now, right? That's our sound. So we're able to make decisions and say, hey, I want this one to have its own deal. Go into the sample, go into the send effects and say, hey, you know, I want some distortion on this one. I'm just not going to use it on one. So I'm just going to leave it off. So pretty cool. And that is this. Now there's one thing I haven't touched on here. So we have our pitch bend, our mod wheel. We also have our ability to map things, which is why I grabbed the second sample. I'm able to say, hey, only play this sample for a specific range of notes. So you see it's not playing it, but as I move into the C5 to C7 range, which there it goes. Now it's working. So this is a bass sound. So maybe I only want it to play during the bass notes, not have it up there. Alternatively, I could try using key tracking on a filter, such as this one, to do it. But this is a master filter, so it wouldn't work so great. So maybe I could come in here to... See, they don't give you... It'd be cool if they gave you filters for each individual one. I don't know what that would do with the processing, though. See, I keep thinking of things that I'm like, man, why didn't they do that? Like, that's kind of a weird thing to leave out. Like, modulating where these things can go and stuff, that would be such a useful tool. Like, outrageously useful. But anyways, see, you can't do the filters here, so I may consider coming up with a way to do that in post. So it'd also be really handy to be able to output these as separate audio streams. So I could have one plugin, and then if I could do like 12 of these or 16 of these, instead of loading up multiple instances to get at individual things, like this could be just so much more powerful. But anyways, that's Iris 2. If you have any questions, let me know. If I missed anything that you thought was important, let me know. subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.